In an office building at night, a scared young woman named Andrea leaves a message for Detective Wade Rollins, saying someone is still following her. She rushes to the elevator, constantly checking over her shoulder. Nervously, she steps inside and watches the floor numbers as the elevator descends. Suddenly, her phone rings. Thinking it's the detective, Andrea picks up, but a man's voice says, "This is how the world ends." Before she can respond, he hangs up. The elevator jolts to a stop. Andrea screams for help and struggles to open the doors. A loud, high-pitched noise fills the air as the walls close in, trapping her. Meanwhile, Jen arrives at a housewarming party for her friend Gina. However, Gina mentions that there was a mix-up, and her husband invited Jen's ex-fiancé, Brian. Despite this, Jen decides to stay. At the party, she awkwardly sits alone and notices Brian across the room. Scott, Gina's husband, apologizes, explaining that he thought Jen wasn't coming to the party, so he invited Brian instead. Gina introduces Jen to her therapist, Dr. Colin Mead, and suggests Jen see him, saying he changed her life. Later, the group chats about their careers, and Dr. Mead asks Jen about her job. Jen nervously says she's between jobs, but Brian quickly adds that she's a talented software engineer. When Brian grabs an appetizer, Jen asks Gina if the food has sesame in it. Gina realizes her mistake, and Scott jokes that Brian could have had an allergic reaction in their new house. Brian, worried, puts his EpiPen on the table, just in case. At the end of the party, Dr. Mead gives Jen his business card. Outside, Brian thanks Jen for helping him and awkwardly admits he misses her, but he doesn't want to bother her. Jen tells him he's making her seem like the bad guy in their past relationship, but she corrects herself, saying neither of them is the bad guy. Brian offers her a ride home, and they end up spending the night together. The next day, Jen regrets what happened. Gina comforts her and suggests she see Dr. Mead again. Jen doesn't like the idea, but Gina insists that she needs it. Jen goes to Dr. Mead's office, where she meets a patient named Tabby, who tells Jen how Mead helped her overcome severe OCD and assures her he'll help Jen too. During her session, Jen opens up about feeling unmotivated and stuck. Dr. Mead tells Jen that bad habits have a cause and asks her what hers might be. When Jen avoids answering, he asks about her relationship with Brian. Jen explains that she and Brian met in college and got engaged while she was pregnant, but she lost the baby. After that, they grew apart. Dr. Mead suggests hypnotherapy, but Jen is hesitant and doesn't want to lose control. He reassures her, saying she will stay in control of her mind and that it will help her heal from the trauma. To help convince her, he asks what she wants, and Jen simply says she wants to be happy. Later, Dr. Mead conducts the hypnotherapy session. Jen watches the light as he guides her to relax. Once she's calm, he asks her to imagine being in a peaceful forest. After the session, Jen is surprised to find that it lasted an hour, even though it felt like only a few minutes. She doesn't remember what happened during the session, but Dr. Mead is positive about the progress. 3 months later, Jen finds a new job after seeing Dr. Mead weekly. Jean feels jealous because Dr. Mead refuses to hypnotize her, which she hoped would help with her fear of spiders. One night, Jen has a dream where she's in bed with Dr. Mead. 2 weeks later, while at the mall, Jen sees a boy who reminds her of the son she lost. Dr. Mead notices her and asks why she hasn't been coming to see him. Jen explains she's been busy with her new job. At a cafe, Jen talks about how she's started doing yoga with Gina and even meditates. When Jen jokes about Dr. Mead spending time with his patients, he opens up to seem more relatable. He tells her that his wife, Amy, passed away. Dr. Mead suggests that instead of focusing on hardships, they should accept life and work toward creating the life they want. He then changes the subject and asks about Brian. Jen admits that she's been avoiding him because it's hard for her to be around him. Dr. Mead asks what Jen thinks will happen if she tells Brian this, and Jen believes it will only hurt him. He encourages her to invite Brian for dinner that evening, insisting it will help her. That evening, Jen gets a call from Brian, saying he'll be there for dinner. She then receives another call and suddenly freezes. Jen later finds herself at home with dinner set on the table. She hears someone choking in the bathroom. When she finds Brian unconscious, she uses his EpiPen and rushes him to the hospital. The next day, Gina meets Jen outside the hospital. She reassures Jen that it was just an accident, but Jen admits she can't remember what happened. Gina thinks it's shock, but Jen insists that the last thing she remembers is being at the store. After Brian has been in a coma for 8 days, Dr. Mead checks in with Jen during their session. Jen feels guilty, thinking she's responsible for what happened. Dr. Mead tells her not to let fear take over and suggests they continue hypnotherapy to help her heal. Jen keeps having troubling dreams about Dr. Mead, which start to worry her. One night, unable to sleep, she goes to the kitchen and finds a receipt for sesame oil from the grocery store. This triggers her memory, and she realizes that the mysterious caller was actually Dr. Mead. She remembers adding sesame oil to the salad she made for Brian. While researching, Jen finds out that Dr. Mead has been linked to several cases where his patients mysteriously died, and Jen discovers articles about crimes committed under hypnosis. The next morning, Jen shares the articles with Gina, pointing out how a patient named Andrea had experienced missing time, just like Jen. She also did a background check on Dr. Mead and found that the first record of him was a restraining order filed against him by Andrea 6 months ago. Gina brushes off Jen's concerns, but Jen keeps pushing. She shows Gina the news articles about crimes committed while under hypnosis. Then she reveals the receipt for the sesame oil and insists that Dr. Mead called her before she bought it. Jen finally remembers everything from that day, but insists that she wasn't in control of herself. After convincing Gina, the two go to see Detective Wade Rollins to ask about Andrea. They tell him that they are also Dr. Mead's patients and that strange things have been happening to Jen. Rollins quickly figures out that Jen went under hypnosis with Dr. Mead, which she confirms. He explains that Dr. Mead was questioned about Andrea's death, but they couldn't get anything out of him. Rollins wanted to dig deeper into the case, but he was told to stop investigating. While in the elevator, he thought Andrea might have had a heart attack due to the intense fear of whatever she saw. After leaving the station, Gina confessed that she had also gone through hypnosis with Dr. Mead. She's now worried that he might do something, and Jen promises they'll figure it out together. Jen makes a last-minute appointment with Dr. Mead. She secretly starts recording on her phone as Tabby leaves, looking scared. Jen tells Dr. Mead that she's been anxious about Brian and needs hypnosis to calm down. At the station, Rollins looks through the case files of Dr. Mead's patients who died and notices a pattern. After the session, Jen rushes to her car and listens to the recording. While under hypnosis, she admitted to Dr. Mead that she was recording him. She also mentioned Andrea and Dr. Mead revealed that he knew she and Gina had been to the station that day. The session ends with Dr. Mead calling her "my love." Later, Gina is driving with Scott to meet clients when Jen calls her, urging her to go back to the house. However, their call gets cut off and another number calls Gina. She answers, and it's Dr. Mead saying, "This is how the world ends." Gina panics when she sees a spider on her lap and asks Scott to remove it, but he doesn't notice it. As the spider crawls toward her neck, Gina speeds up in fear, causing the car to crash into a truck. Jen arrives at the scene and screams in distress. Rollins visits Dr. Mead at his office and tells him that Gina and Scott are dead. He questions Dr. Mead about Gina while secretly slipping one of Dr. Mead's cocktail spoons into his pocket. Rollins observes that all of Dr. Mead's patients who underwent hypnosis share similar physical traits. Dr. Mead tries to avoid the topic and offers to help Rollins with his insomnia, but the detective leaves without saying anything further. Later, Rollins visits Jen. She admits to recording Dr. Mead and reveals that he knew they were investigating him. Rollins points out that Dr. Mead never hypnotized Gina until Jen started asking questions, but assures her it wasn't her fault. He mentions he ran Dr. Mead's prints through the cocktail spoon, hoping it will lead them to more answers. After Rollins leaves, Jen finds Andrea's case file on her table. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Jen opens it, expecting Rollins, but it's Dr. Mead standing there. Jen tries to quickly shut the door, but Dr. Mead pushes it open. When he tells her to stop, she freezes. Dr. Mead asks why she doesn't trust him, saying he only helped her get what she wanted. He claims Brian and Gina were just obstacles to her goals and promises he will handle Rollins too. He tells Jen that everything he's doing is for her and insists his actions are out of love. He moves close, almost touching her, but then steps back. Before leaving, he tells her to relax, and she suddenly falls to the ground. Jen locks the door and tries calling Rollins, but he doesn't pick up. At his apartment, Rollins charges his phone. While eating dinner, he hears noises and checks around but finds nothing. He goes back to his food, unaware that someone is hiding in his kitchen cabinet. Suddenly, Tabby attacks him. Rollins fights back, but she continues. In a panic, he grabs a box and hits her, ending the attack. The next day, Jen visits Rollins in the hospital. She tells him she has the same symptoms as the other women. They talk about their experiences with Dr. Mead and his connection to the news articles. Jen suggests seeing a professional for hypnosis to make a statement about Dr. Mead. Rollins, however, doubts it will be enough to make a murder case against him. Jen is afraid of what Dr. Mead might do to her, so she pleads with Rollins to let her try to figure it out. Jen plays a recording for Dr. Stella Graham, the police hypnotist, revealing her distrust of hypnosis. Dr. Graham assures her that she'll only uncover what Jen's subconscious knows about Dr. Mead. During the session, Jen chokes, recalling a conversation with Dr. Mead about his mother, Dr. Sullivan, and remembering a house where he gave her a gold bracelet with the date March 6th. Dr. Graham realizes Dr. Mead implanted a failsafe to prevent others from hypnotizing Jen, suggesting he placed multiple triggers. Jen decides to visit the house from her vision. She researches Dr. Sullivan, learning he was involved in MKUltra, and tells Rollins her plan. Despite his warning, she goes. At the house, Jen rings the doorbell, but enters when no one answers. Inside, she finds a photo of Dr. Mead with his late wife, Amy. Dr. Mead appears, reveals Dr. Sullivan was his father, and puts Jen to sleep. Rollins learns Dr. Mead's fingerprints match Julian Sullivan's and tries calling Jen, but she doesn't answer. Jen wakes up in Dr. Mead's office, calls Rollins, and tells him where she is. She grabs a letter opener just as Dr. Mead enters. Outside, the police arrive, heading to the office. Dr. Mead tells Jen she reminds him of his late wife, Amy, and admits other patients resembled her, but Jen more so. As the police approach, he tells Jen to wake up, and she finds herself back in the house. The police find the office empty, and Rollins directs them to Sullivan's address. Back at the house, Dr. Mead paints Jen's nails while she watches, realizing he's implanted his memories of Amy in her. He tries to recreate Amy with her. When she calls him insane, he pulls her hair and insists he isn't. He places a gold bracelet on her, saying it's the anniversary of his marriage to Amy. Just as Dr. Mead leans in for a kiss, Rollins bursts in. The sound shakes Jen from her trance, but Dr. Mead orders her to hold the bed rails while he handles Rollins. Jen screams for Rollins, telling him she's trapped. Rollins finds the locked room but searches the house for Dr. Mead. The power goes out, and he fires blindly at movement. Jen breaks free from hypnosis, but Dr. Mead knocks Rollins down. He orders her to sleep, but she fights to stay awake and shoots him. Jen wakes up to Rollins telling her she shot Dr. Mead. As he comforts her, he says, "My love," triggering Jen's memory. She snaps back, hits Dr. Mead with an ashtray, and shoots him twice after finding another gun. A month later, Jen visits Brian in the hospital and apologizes. She then sees Rollins, now promoted. He gives her a gift, and after leaving, she laughs when she finds a hypnosis CD inside.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.